Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Sports Medicine Update. This is Jerry Riles, and, of course, the guest of honor, the man of the hour, Dr. Chad Pedromas. Doc, how are you?
Fantastic, Jerry. How about you?
I'm doing. Thank you so very much. There's a lot to cover, and I definitely want to get into it. Episode number 5. This is the best sports medicine update around the country, ladies and gentlemen. If you don't know, you better tell somebody. You're going to find out real soon how valuable this podcast is. A weekly podcast, Sports Medicine Update with Dr. Chad Pedromas. So, Doc, the big news is, and the exciting news around the world of sports is that baseball is looking like it's finally coming back. And teams have reported, obviously, July 1st, Wednesday of last week, they reported to respective facilities around the country. And our own Chicago Cubs and Chicago White Sox are at Guaranteed Rate Field on the south side and Wrigley Field on the north side. Players are already reporting, and the protocol that's put in place for all these teams includes testing daily to make sure that there's no positive tests regarding COVID-19. As we know how the numbers are spiking in other parts of the country, whether it's in Arizona, California, Florida, and Texas. Right now, Chicago seems to be pretty much leveling off, but sports fans around the country are eager to see baseball get back into groove, and no fans will probably be invited to the ballpark, but the fact that we'll get an opportunity to watch some baseball starting July 23rd and 24th, I know a lot of fans are looking forward to it, but the question is, how safe is it for these players to return to normalcy, so to speak?
You know, you never know, and things can happen, but overall, it's pretty safe. I've tried to do some research on young, healthy athletes, professional athletes. People get sick, but, obviously mortality, death is the thing that we're all concerned about. And I cannot discern that any professional athletes in this recent time when things are getting geared up, have died. Some people have gotten infected. I don't think most are even getting particularly sick. There was a report from a couple of months ago about professional people who had died, but they were all pretty much older. There was one young, unfortunate person. He was a coach, 21, had leukemia. This was a few months ago. There was a college baseball player in Colorado a few months ago, young, apparently healthy, unfortunately passed away. But overall, the overwhelming majority of them will either not get symptoms or will get mild symptoms. And so, I think it's pretty safe. We could talk more about it in a bit, but there's, the statistics are kind of interesting and they can be kind of confusing. There is case rate and there's death rate. And as the case rate goes up and the death rate goes down, it doesn't get us exactly to herd immunity, but more people that have immunity does kind of bend the curve. So at the end of the day, I think it's going to go well.
I'm hoping that it goes well. And you're right. We're talking about, athletes who are anywhere from, early 20s, 21, 22, to some that may be, 30, 31, 32 on average as far as these Major League Baseball players are concerned. But some of the concern revolved around the managers. As you all know, they're in their late 50s, early to mid 60s, i.e. Dusty Baker is, 71, I believe. So the concern is the safety and protection and healthness as far as what these managers are concerned. Will they be healthy in this particular atmosphere, or what you may call a bubble?
Yeah, and I'll tell you something. If I were so age in and of itself is a risk factor, but not as big a risk factor as illnesses. And so, male gender, males get this more than females, and heavy people get it more than less heavy people. So, I'll tell you something. There are reports of young athletes from all sports who say, I just don't feel comfortable doing it. And if they don't feel comfortable, then they definitely shouldn't. I think it's a great point you raise about the managers, by the way. But I think if you're a manager and you're older, they're male, and if you're a little heavy, quite honestly, I think someone like that might be the person who might take a sabbatical year. I mean, you can come. The odds are still very much in your favor. But great point you raise. They are at some risk, and there aren't too many older, heavy managers, but there are some, and I would worry a little about them.
Yeah, and that is a concern, and I got to say kudos to Major League Baseball, the owners overall, and of course the respective franchises and organizations that, again, when the Cubs reported on the north side and the Sox reported on the south side, there was testing going on regarding these players. Their pitching coach, Tommy Hatavi, unfortunately, he came down, was stricken with COVID-19, and he spent the last 30 days in quarantine. And he said it was basically, in a nutshell, it was one of the most difficult times and experiences in his life, and the sacrifice that his family had to make through this ordeal. And he wouldn't wish this his worst enemy because of how challenging and how difficult and how much of a physical toll that it took on him. How do you react and respond to that?
Well, I think as we understand the contagion of the disease a little better, the quarantine recommendations now are shorter. Mm-hmm. It's 14 days, and really most people are saying that it's less than that. That out to maybe 10 days, depending on when you had symptoms. If you're sick, obviously you don't want to be coming back. But the tests can be positive because of viral fragments that are not contagious, and this has been tested. So I think that currently for people that are feeling well, the quarantines are going to be substantially shorter, and even a little more than that if you happen to get. So the tests can run longer than real contagion, but if you get a test sooner or two of them that are negative, you can probably cut it down even more in some people. So I think, and again, the quarantine's certainly not pleasant, but it's less bad if you're not real sick. And most of these young athletes are not going to be real sick or not going to be sick at all. There's a lot of new, really interesting evidence about people who are asymptomatic as well. So tough, but maybe less tough than it has been.
Yeah, but Doc, the major concern with is the fact that this guy, Tommy Hatavi, the pitching coach for the Cubs, he's 6 years of age, I think between 32, 36 years of age, which is relatively young, and he tested positive, and he's not really sure how he contracted the virus, because he said he's taken all measures to be safe and wear his mask and practice social distancing and doing everything that it was called for. Yet, he tested positive, and physically, he said it was really, really difficult, challenging, and downright frightening, because he said at night was the worst time because of the breathing or lack thereof, that he couldn't sleep. And the only time that he could get some rest was during the day, and the toll that it took on his family and his wife, what she had to endure to help him through this entire process. It's just surprising to a lot of people, the fact that you're talking about Major League Baseball. He's a coach, of course, but you would imagine he's in a great physical condition. But he somehow got it, and he's fortunate and blessed enough that he overcame it. But what he endured in 30 days of quarantining, it's kind of scratching. People are scratching their head, wondering, well, this guy, how did he get it? He's not overweight. He didn't have any pre-existing, conditions. He's in a professional atmosphere. How did he get it?
Yeah, I mean, there's outlying ways you can get it. We know, most of the news is good on this front. It's become pretty clear that that surfaces are much less a culprit than people thought that they might be. I mean, you still have to be careful, and as I've mentioned before in our medical office, we scrub down everything between each patient, and we're very careful. However, it doesn't look like people get things off surfaces very often, that it's a respiratory thing and respiratory droplets. And I think there are going to be cases that you get for no reason. But honestly, the more important factors, I think, are what happened, as I was alluding to, when you get sick. And he was pretty uncomfortable and, frightened, obviously, understandably. But young, healthy, not overweight, uncomfortable, but got better. And that's what's going to happen to most people. In fact, that's going to be worse than what is going to happen to most people. And that's the main thing, is just getting better. As far as the other part of this, it isn't talked about it as much, but see, the vaccine aspect of this is tricky because, again, we don't have one now. We may not get one soon. We may not get one ever. So locking down everybody all the time, waiting for a vaccine, I think is the downside of complete lockdowns for something that may never come is just too great. But the treatment aspect of this is kind of looking up. Remdesivir is out there. Remdesivir isn't dramatic, but it's been shown to help. As I mentioned last time, steroids. Since we spoke last time, there was a very interesting report that came out 48 hours ago from Henry Ford Medical Center in Detroit, at Dr. Zervos, who is kind of revisiting hydroxychloroquine, and found that the mortality rate, the death rate for people who took hydroxychloroquine, and this was hydroxychloroquine without azithromycin, without zinc too, just hydroxychloroquine for like a week, was half of other people. So, and there are other studies that seem to be showing this. Actually, we're doing a systematic review of it now at our research foundation. So that, that may be back on the table. There was, of course, Dr. Raoult in France, who treated 4,000 people. Dr. Zelenko in New York treated 1,000 people. Dr. Zelenko did it with zinc, and there seems to be a common denominator. We're not done with our research, but it is looking like there's a differentiation between taking it early and taking it late. The nice thing is it's safe and it's cheap. Remdesivir, $3,120 they're estimating for a course. Hydroxychloroquine, like 50 cents. And I don't want to go on too long here, but one other point in this regard that I think is extremely important is that we have done a study of the toxicity of it. I don't remember if I mentioned this last week. Hopefully I'm not repeating myself. But to make a long story short, it's been used for decades in rheumatoid patients without problems. So we finished a study that showed that there doesn't appear to be a single fatality ever reported from hydroxychloroquine from the arrhythmia, which is what the FDA warned about, that the only deaths have occurred in people who have taken it for 10, 15, 20 years. And those are very few as well, totally different problem. So what I'm saying is, if you look at the equation, the one thought is, well, better be careful because it's dangerous, but properly used, it appears to not be. And now we've got a new report indicating that it saves lives. So, one more tool with that. The government is starting a push to get what's so-called convalescent plasma for people that have been sick with it. So that's more readily available. There are companies coming out with antibodies. What I'm saying is, if you take a young, healthy population, the chances of anything very bad happening are very low to begin with. And then as we make incremental benefits, improvements in treatment, the whole equation, I think, just is continually, in subtle but definite ways, shifting toward the better. And I want to make sure, if conveying anything to whoever happens to be watching or listening to this, that bad news sells. That's, everybody's known that about the news industry forever. So God bless them, right? But there's a lot of good news, and there are reasons for optimism.
Yeah, bad news does sell, unfortunately, and we want to try to reduce the bad as much as we possibly can. Dr. Chad Fajolma's Sports Medicine Update, a weekly podcast. Yours truly, Jerry Riles. It's interesting as we talk about the return of Major League Baseball with the shortened season, but we're also focusing on the NBA with the hub that they're placing down at the ESPN Wide World of Sports, Disney World down in Florida. And, we're looking on the possible return of National Football League and players getting back together. The important message that's being conveyed through all of this, Doctor, is that, the droplets, they're telling the general public to wear your mask, practice social distancing, avoid touching your face, wash your hands. But when you talk about sports, and in particular the high-level professional league, there's a lot of contact involved. Basketball, as we know, there's, physical contact, whether it's, banging bodies, the sweat that's, being distributed. People are yelling, players are, saying whatever they can, and the droplets are coming out. And then with the National Football League, we know that that's a physical sport. And, linemen are clashing every 30 seconds between, plays or between the huddles. I mean, there's a lot of physical contact going on, a lot of yelling and a lot of screaming. Is there concern regarding those particular sports and the spread of the virus?
Yeah, there is, and it kind of varies by sport. Again, young, lean, healthy people many times don't get sick at all. Almost always they do. It's very minor. And, basketball players are all young, lean, and healthy. It was interesting. Zion Williamson is back and just jacked. He's still a big guy, but leaner than he was. And so that's a good thing for him. What was of more concern is football, because there's some guys in baseball that are little thick, but a lot of football players are kind of heavy. And I think that, I have a thought, something that I might try to get out there, but I worry about the big linemen some. And, people that are heavy sometimes do get comorbidities. Some of those people are going to have, high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, all come with being overweight. You can get them on their own, but much more. So some of the big people will have some of those problems. And I'll tell you what I think would be a great policy. And again, something that I'm going to try to get out there a little bit is that, I remember when people used to be a lot smaller. Football players weren't that big. William Perry, before he was the refrigerator, Dan Hampton nicknamed him Biscuit. And he said that's because he's one biscuit shy of 300 pounds. So it takes you back. Right. That was in the days when 300 pounds was too heavy to be a defensive tackle. Now a 300-pound defensive tackle is undersized, won't even get drafted. Right. And so the thing is that so players have been forced to be bigger. And I don't think most players really like it. Having to carry around 350 pounds and say, hey, you're a lineman, you want to play in the NFL, you've got to be that big or you won't play. It's hard on their bodies. They know it. Many of them, after they're done, will drop 100 pounds. Tom Thayer is nice and lean, not as bulky as he was. So everybody knows him. So, here's what I think. I think that the NFL should do the following thing. I think they should place a body fat restriction on players. Now, BMI, body mass index, is what is usually promulgated. The problem with BMI is that if you're very muscular, you can have a high BMI and a low body fat. A lot of these guys do. But if you put a limit of body fat of 20%, now, most NBA players are down into single digits, right? And NFL skill players tend to be too. But the linemen are not. And if you said you get tested and it's easy enough to test, that you have to be 20% or less, that's not emaciated, but what you would do is you wouldn't have the 350-pound people who have a large stomach because that's just not healthy. Not to get too wonky here, but fat is pro-inflammatory, adipose tissue. So, for example, everybody knows that heavy people get more knee arthritis than others because they're carrying around more weight on their knees. But many people don't know that people who are heavy get more hand arthritis than others. So why is that? That's because the adipose tissue has humoral factors, we call them, that make your joints more inflamed. Cancers, higher, just inflammatory conditions in general. So what does COVID-19 do? It does its damage by an immune response, an inflammatory response that's overly aggressive. So if the NFL were to say, look, you can't be more than 20% body fat, those people would be, at least to some degree, at lower risk to get sick now. And I'll tell you something else. The longevity for NFL players is surprisingly low. Big guys even lower. So you take somebody, and from the time they're 19 to they're 29, and they're forced to be big to play, if you said, no, we don't want you that big, they will get less accumulation of plaque in their arteries. When they get older, they'll be happier people. I think they'd like it. Players now cannot voluntarily downsize because they'll be at a competitive disadvantage. But if the NFL leveled the playing field, the players would like it, I think. They'd be healthier later. They'd be healthier earlier. Some of the collisions and injuries, it's 300-pound guy tackling you or 270-pound guy is bad, but 350-pound guy is worse. And I can't see any reason why this would be bad for anybody. It would definitely help health. Just one other minor digression. So when I was in college in the 70s out east, they had a thing called 150 football. So the idea was that they wanted guys who weren't huge to be able to play football. So you had to weigh 150 pounds or less when you played. And there were 7 colleges that had this out in the East Coast where I was. So, I mean, who weighs 150 pounds now, 140, 130? Nobody, right? So it's evolved over the years. It still exists. They changed it to sprint football, and the weight limit now is 172. But the idea is, so what I'm saying is there is precedent in football for having weight restrictions on people, for everybody's good. I think for female athletes, if you were to look at this, an appropriate body fat would be 30%. Females, for various hormonal reasons, mostly, and others, kind of in general carry a little more fat in a beneficial way. But I mean, it isn't really good for female athletes. It isn't good for anybody to be really big health-wise. So I think this would help the COVID situation, at least some, and I think it would help overall health. I think it would be a great message for these pro sports leagues to send to the country where obesity is out of control, because then you'd have your role models. So what do you think, Jerry?
No, I in theory, Doc, that sounds like $1 million. It sounds fantastic. It really does. But when you bring it into the reality of the world and the world of sports, you always have the players union who's going to balk at it one way or the other. Because you got coaches, you got other players. If you got a player such as, and this is what happened, why and how these players were able to evolve as far as the weight was concerned. And you're right, back when William Perry, the refrigerator, as we know, got the nickname, he was slightly over 300 pounds. He was 302. And for us back during that time, we had never seen a lineman that big, and he was the refrigerator. But as you know, and you quickly, recall, the Dallas Cowboys, within a matter of years, their entire line was 300 plus pounds because they saw the effectiveness of the mass from William the Refrigerator Perry and what he was able to do. So their entire line was 300 pounds plus. Hence, that's why Troy Aikman and Emmitt Smith went on to win those Super Bowls, and of course Emmitt Smith breaking Walter Payton's record. So you're going to have some pushback when you talk about the Players Association, because they don't want a particular person. And athletes, they're I call them aliens, but they're freaks because they're superhuman. But if you get one freak like a Lawrence Taylor, who's pushing, let's say hypothetically, a 300-pounder, and then you get someone else going up against him and say, wait a minute, I need to bulk up my weight a little bit more because of what this guy is doing to me. You're going to have to battle with that. So if the league and the owners say this is what we want to do for the best, your best interest at hand and your longevity as far as life is concerned after football, I guarantee you're going to have some pushback from the union and players to say, hey, wait a minute. No, you don't have to worry about me because you're giving me a disadvantage, giving them an edge over me, which it's going to cost me money at the end of the day because of my contract.
I'll tell you, yeah, maybe. But I'll tell you something. And when you start talking about weight, it gets to be a hot button issue because it's particularly been one around females. Back in the day, they used to weigh female flight attendants, and they had to be thin and thought to be sexist and a bad idea. And I think it is a bad idea. But this isn't like that. This is for their health. And I think, as I say, that, and by the way, you can be, by what I'm proposing, you can be 350 pounds if you want. You just have to be 20-pound body fat or less, right? So if you want to be the baddest, biggest guy in the field, go for it. But do it. Alonzo Spellman, you might remember in the Bears way back. They talked about it. He was 6'2", 290, at least listed as, but just ripped, that guy that big. So fine. His BMI is going to be high, probably 35, which is morbidly obese for a normal person. Sure. So go for it, get to be big, but do it the right way. And it'd be an interesting thing. I don't know why the players union, because you're not putting anybody to disadvantage. I personally, I think it's the same kind of thing as eliminating kickoffs or eliminating spearing. I think it's a restriction that, because people say that now about defensive players, right? Some defensive players have said, well, if I can't put a helmet on somebody, I'm at a disadvantage. But everybody says, no, wait a minute. You can get paralyzed, right? So we're doing this for your protection. So I think if it's a level playing field and you say to people, this is for your protection, you want to be huge, go for it, but you got to be ripped huge. Jerry, you're a smart guy. You've been around the athletic scene, so you probably know better than I, but I just cannot see why the players union of players wouldn't think that it's a plus because it's for their own health and it's a level playing field.
No, I agree with you. And I think if you put some thought behind it, with some research to support it, I think it's a fantastic idea. But like you said, I've been around long enough, and I know. Just looking at this baseball season, shortened season, it took 142 days for the two sides to come to some sort of agreement because there's a back and forth, and at the end of the day, it all revolved around the health and safety of the players and the game. And so whenever there's something implemented on one side, you can guarantee the other side is going to balk at it and say, what is it in for? What do I get out of this? Well, what do we benefit from this? And so that's why I hint that it's going to be, if it's ever come to surface and implemented, that there's going to be, a back and forth until both sides can see, the way that they can benefit. And when we talk about benefit, it's got to be monetarily at the end of the day. But I agree with you. Think about what has happened in the National Football League when you talk about, taking away kickoffs and spearing and, the sort of tackling that's going on. A lot of people say that they're losing interest in watching the game because there are a lot of purists out there who want to see the physical contact. They want to see the kickoffs. They want to see the game the way that they watched it as they grew up. And so to implement these changes or adjustments to protect the player. Like I said, in theory, on paper, it sounds fantastic and sound like there's something that, it's reasonable and logical. But when you put it into reality and you talk about the money involved in it, that's where it becomes a real big stickler. And another thing, Doc, regarding the idea, you take a look at, wrestling and boxing, when they have to weigh in, for a bout or, a meet, you got wrestlers who, they'll put on one of those sweatsuits, man, and they'll be sweating all day long to lose like 1.5 pounds just so they can make weight, So if you're asking a player who's, a half a pound or whatever the case may be over the projected limit, what are they going to do to try to meet that standard in order to get out there on Sunday or Thursday or Monday night, to compete?
You're right. And I remember my older brother was a wrestler, and he had one of those plastic suits. And I remember he'd go running, and there was a gathered thing at the ankle, and he'd open it up, and it was like a faucet, just pounds of sweat. And that's been outlawed in like collegiate wrestling, high school wrestling for a long time because it's bad for it. But let me give you an example, though. The Miami Heat, right? So respected organization, Pat Riley, all these guys. So the Miami Heat they weigh all their players. I don't know if they do body fat, but I know that they weigh them. And they had, gosh, I don't want to say the wrong person. I'm not sure who it was now as I sit here, but they had one of their players who didn't meet conditioning, and the thought was that it was weight, and he didn't play for a large part of the season. So they weigh their players. I don't know how often they do it, but I know they do it regularly, and they give goals for them, and they want them to be a certain weight. I mean, it happens. It happens in the NFL all the time too, where people will say, well, you can play it this weight, but we really like you at this weight, right? And so it's not like there isn't a precedent for weighing people. And then, so, how do you make weight? How the guys in the Heat make weight? I mean, I guess they could do it the wrong way, but there's enough sophistication out there at this point in time that I think probably the message you get through, the sweating off 15 pounds of water, which people used to do in a day, is not real smart. So I think what I'm saying is there's guys making weight, people making weight now. So I think that, and there are people who are told to, transform their bodies, get bigger, get smaller, whatever. The Bradley Soul, right? He was a 10 maybe pound defensive tackle and got down to maybe 275. Yeah. Seemed to, to switch tight end. So I think they can do it. Maybe I'm naive and idealistic. Maybe people would look and say it's controlled. I'm just not doing it. But man, I think, and I'm going to talk to some people. It's interesting points you raise, and see some ex-big guys and say, hey, what do you think about this? How would you have felt when you were playing if they did that? Because maybe you're right.
Yeah, no, I know a lot of former athletes, and I've seen them in their playing days, and I've seen them in their retiring years, and it's very difficult for them to maintain a playing weight, and a lot of players feel comfortable at a particular weight, but once they leave the game, that discipline that they had instilled in them since some grade school, most in high school, over time they end up losing that. And you use Tom Thayer as an example. He's a great example. He's remained physically fit. He looks fantastic. But for every Tom Thayer, I can almost guarantee you got 10, 15, 20 other former players who I've seen them and I go, wow, what happened to you? Because of the, they're not disciplined enough to work out and don't have to work out every day. And so, it's hard for them to push away from the dinner table. And those pounds quickly start to add up. And unfortunately, we see a lot of former athletes, and we talk about the COVID-19 and the pandemic. We've seen a lot of athletes, older athletes, who succumb to the virus due to their physical deficiencies over the years, whether it's obesity, some with diabetes, or whatever the case may be. So you talk about currently, protecting a player, but I think the long-term concern is what happens to them after they leave the game, in particular football, and that's where a lot of the problems lie regarding these professional athletes, in my opinion.
That's true. Getting back to the football thing again, though, and you're right. You can be done, and you can lose discipline, and you can get out of condition. You can gain weight, but I would suggest that if for the 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years that you're in the NFL and maybe a big time college program, if during that period you're being lean and you're learning good habits, not everybody, but I think a lot. First of all, you'll be healthier when you get older because you'll have less plaque in your arteries after you're finished, just by virtue of being leaner then. But it shows them good habits, as opposed to just get to be as big as you can and just eat whatever you want. So I think some of those people would benefit by the good habits they develop while they're playing.
No, you're right. Some of them would. It comes to mind a great strong safety for the Ohio State Buckeyes. He played with the Chicago Bears. If you recall, he set out the Super Bowl year back in '85. Todd Bell, he and Al Harris, they set out because of contract dispute with the Bears, and unfortunately they didn't get a chance to be a part of that Super Bowl winning team. But Todd Bell, years later, after he left the game, he succumbed. He died from a massive heart attack, and he was one of the most physically fit individuals on the planet. And his work regimen was out of this world. Yet he passed away, I think, maybe in the mid-30s, early 40s, from a massive heart attack. And I think part of it is the fact that I think it's you, and you help me out with this, but I think because of the consistent high level of performance these players put into their craft, their skill set, the game, once they leave it, the body is so accustomed over an extended period of time to performing at a high level that once they decrease it, the stress level has some type of effect on the heart, and it causes, health problems. And in Todd Bell's case, it cost him his life. That's my theory. I don't know. You're in the medical industry. You may have a better perspective.
Yeah, Jerry, I don't. And the truth of the matter is that he's kind of, very unfortunate, kind of an outlier. Yeah. Nobody knows. So your theory is as good as mine. I certainly don't have a better one. But I will say that, again, risk factors for heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, and high cholesterol, and they're all probably a majority of the people in the country now that have those things, it is secondary to increased weight. So what I would say is, for every unfortunate case of a Todd Bell out there, I think there are a lot more people who are getting heart attacks and other problems, cancer. The incidence of cancer is dramatically higher in people who are heavy, So, his case is certainly unfortunate, and I don't know why, but I think it's much more common, on the other side of it. And I think you could save a lot more lives, by getting these people to have maybe better habits while they're playing.
Yeah. I love your theory. I really do. And it should be introduced, not only to the National Football League, but I think across the entire spectrum regarding sports, because at the end of the day, it's about being healthy. And talk about investing millions of dollars in these athletes to perform, consistently the way that they do. So you want the best of these individuals. But once they leave the game, I think, there should be an obligation placed on, the care after they leave the court, the field, or whatever the case may be. Unfortunately, it comes down to the individual and the discipline. I'll give you one thing I think that athletes should do and all teams should do. They should bring my daughter on board. My daughter, she's turned vegan. It's affected my eating habits, Doc.
There you go.
So I think that's what people, athletes need. They need, because they always need structure. They always need direction. They need the discipline. And once they leave, they find themselves, in the real world for the first time, and they're in their, mid 30s, late or early 40s, and they really don't know what to do, how to adjust to real life. And there should be some type of bridge program put into place for these athletes once they leave, the professional world, how to adjust and adapt to the real world.
Well, no question. And I know you're familiar with, Mike Ditka, Gridiron Greats, and there's a thing called the NFL Alumni Association.
Yep.
And there is, there's so much money in that business. And Mike Ditka, I think, has done fantastic things with that. And I think the NFL alumni too. And so they're trying to make a difference. But you're absolutely right, boy. I mean, with all the money that's out there, just, little more attention, a little more resources for the bridge that you mentioned afterward.
Yeah. Doc, we can continue to go on. And again, it's always great to sit down and chat with you and just hear the knowledge that you have to just make this a better world, and especially in the sports world, to enlighten not only the professional athletes who may be checking out the podcast, but your everyday guy who's a weekend warrior, whether he's going out on the golf course or, shooting ball away or, preparing for a marathon. I know that the information that you provide and the insight that you provide is very, very helpful and can go a long, long way. If anybody is interested in finding out more about Dr. Chad Prodromos and your practice, how do they get a hold of you? How do they find out?
Well, the number I think's on the screen is just one main number. It's 847-699-6810. We've got a great staff. Anybody that you get can help you. And our website is ISMOC, Illinois Sports Medicine and Orthopedic Center.net. And if you want to send us an email, every one of them looked at and answered. It's ortho, O-R-T-H-O, @ISMOC.net.
Well, Doc, thank you so very much. The Sports Medicine Update, a weekly podcast with Dr. Chad Prodromos. I'm Jerry Riles. Have an enjoyable 4th of July holiday weekend. And of course, we'll see you next week to talk more about sports medicine. Take care, Doc.
You too. Thanks much, Jerry, as always.